Mark Sullivan slammed his fist against the Toyota Corolla's window so hard that the sharp thud made Emily Parker release the steering wheel for an instant, as if she had been jolted. "Get out of my spot now!" His shout echoed through the stifling Walmart parking lot in Dallas, drawing the attention of passing shoppers with carts. His face was so close to the glass that Emily could see the flushed skin and feel his hot breath seeping through the narrow crack in the window. He pounded first with a closed fist, then with an open palm, as if trying to break the barrier between them. "You think you can just steal my parking spot and get away with it?" He spat the words, each syllable seeming to carry years of pent-up frustration. Around them, a few people stopped, but no one stepped closer. Emily clutched her purse tightly against her body, trying to remain calm, though her heart pounded against her ribs as if trying to escape. The tension in the air was almost tangible. The slow footsteps of onlookers, the distant hum of an engine shutting off, the metallic creak as Mark leaned against the car. And at that moment, there was no doubt. This wasn't a simple dispute over a parking space. It was a direct attack loaded with something far darker. Mark Sullivan punched the Toyota Corolla's window with such force that the dry crack reverberated through the Walmart parking lot in Dallas, instantly attracting stares. Emily Parker, still strapped into her seatbelt, widened her eyes and instinctively leaned back as if trying to put distance between herself and his suffocating presence. "Get out of my spot now." His voice was a thunderclap charged with rage and contempt. His face, just inches from hers, was red, slick with sweat, and each breath felt like an assault. Emily tried to grasp what was happening, but her racing heartbeat and the suffocating Texas heat made clear thinking impossible. Mark didn't wait for an answer. He circled to the driver's side and smacked the door with his open palm, the sound ringing through the metal. "You think you can steal my spot and get away with it?" He spoke loudly enough for anyone within 30 feet to hear, cutting at her dignity like a sharp blade. Emily rolled the window down just a few centimeters. "Sir, I didn't see..." But he didn't let her finish. "Don't lie to me. I was right here, waiting. You women always think the rules don't apply to you." A couple pushing a shopping cart slowed down, exchanged an uncomfortable glance, and then quickly walked away, as if escaping a storm. Further back, a Walmart employee in a blue vest stood by the automatic doors, biting her lower lip, uncertain. Mark gestured wildly as if performing for an invisible audience, waving his arms, pointing at her car, the ground, himself. With each second, his tone rose, his words dripping with venom. "You can't even park straight. Look at this mess." The space was perfectly aligned, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that he controlled the situation. Emily tried to remain calm, her hands slick on the steering wheel. "I can move the car if you want." Again he cut her off, leaning so close their faces nearly touched. "Too late. You need to learn some respect." His breath smelled of stale coffee and long-harbored anger, and Emily turned her face away, breathing quickly. A teenage boy a few yards away pulled out his phone and began recording, pretending to text. Mark noticed and shot him a look that was almost a silent threat, before refocusing entirely on Emily. "You think anyone's going to help you? Nobody cares. Nobody's coming." The words fell like a verdict, and the silence that followed was even heavier than his shouts. Heat radiated off the asphalt in waves, and the distant sound of a car speeding away on the highway was a reminder that the world outside went on, indifferent. Mark stepped back and kicked the front tire hard, the impact echoing. Emily flinched, her heart racing. Some people on the sidewalk stopped but kept their distance, as if an invisible barrier separated them from the man. Mark began pacing around the car, running his hand over the metal, knocking on the roof with his knuckles. "This is my town, my rules," he said, not looking at her but projecting his voice for everyone to hear. Emily glanced in the rearview mirror and saw two more onlookers stop. One murmured something she couldn't make out, but their expression showed indignation. She took a deep breath and rolled the window down a bit more, trying to end it. "Please, I really didn't mean..." Mark tilted his head and let out a humorless, dry laugh. "You think please fixes this?" He crouched to her level, bracing himself on the car. "No, ma'am, today you're going to learn." Emily felt the tremor in her legs and pressed her lips together to keep from answering impulsively. There was something in his eyes that wasn't just anger over a parking space. It was pleasure in seeing her cornered, and it sent a cold shiver down her spine despite the heat. Suddenly, a distant whistle cut through the air, but Mark didn't move. On the contrary, he raised his chin, defying the sound's source. Emily realized it came from somewhere in the lot, but she couldn't see where. The onlookers also turned toward the noise, and for a moment the attention shifted. Mark seized the chance to launch another attack. "You know what happens to people who disrespect me?" He slammed the hood with force. Each hit a final punctuation to an unspoken threat. Emily felt a knot in her stomach. The air was heavy, sweat trailing down her neck. The whistle sounded again, closer now, and Mark shot a quick glance to the side but turned back to her. "Doesn't matter. Nobody's going to stop me." Then Emily noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A silhouette emerged between cars, heading toward them. She couldn't make out who it was, but the dark uniform stood out against the sun's glare. Mark kept spewing insults, but the tension in the air had subtly shifted. Emily saw that some onlookers were now recording openly. The whistle blew a third time, louder, and Mark hesitated for a split second, just enough for Emily to feel a spark of hope. But he quickly recovered, leaning even closer to the car, blocking her view. "Look at me, ma'am. Don't think you can just wish this away." His voice was a growl, each word carrying the promise of something worse. The silhouette drew nearer, but Emily didn't know if it meant rescue or more danger. And as the heat, noise, and tension swirled together, the burning question hanging in the air was, what would happen when that presence finally reached them? The guard did not back down for an instant. With a calculated movement, he positioned himself directly between Mark and Emily's car, raising an open hand in a blocking gesture, his eyes locked on the aggressor, as if he could pierce right through him. "I said step away," he repeated, his voice deep and sharp like cold steel. Mark, who until then had seemed fueled by his own rage, gave a half-arrogant smile, trying to keep control. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" he asked, taking a threatening step forward. "I'm the guy who's going to make sure you never try to intimidate anyone here again," the guard replied without even blinking. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of authority. The small crowd that had gathered around was now completely silent, the tension in the air so thick it could be felt on the skin. Emily, still inside the car, watched every detail, her heart racing but with a growing spark of hope. Mark tried to laugh, but the sound came out hollow. "She stole my spot, I'm just setting things straight." The guard tilted his head slightly, like someone assessing a wild animal before restraining it. "That spot doesn't belong to anyone, but that behavior has consequences, and you're about to find out what they are." The words were delivered slowly, each one hitting like a hammer. Without warning, the guard took a step forward, fully invading Mark's personal space. The difference in posture was striking. While Mark stepped back slightly, trying to maintain a facade of superiority, the guard stood firm, like a wall. "What's your name?" the guard asked. Mark hesitated, looked around, and noticed several cell phones recording. "None of your business." It was the weakest response he could muster in that moment. "Wrong. Now it is my business," the guard shot back, pulling a small notepad from his pocket. "You just harassed a customer, damaged her vehicle, and caused a disturbance on private property. That's enough for me to call the police, and I'm going to do it." Mark blinked a few times, as if the words took time to process. "You're not going to do anything," he ventured, but his voice no longer had the same strength. The guard grabbed the radio on his belt and spoke clearly. "Security to the east entrance. Code 3. The response came almost immediately through the static. "On our way." Mark looked around, his arrogance slowly melting away, replaced by visible discomfort. He realized people weren't just recording, but also whispering and shaking their heads in disapproval. "You know what I see here?" the guard said, taking another step forward and forcing Mark to back up. "I see a man who needs to yell and threaten to feel important. A man who thinks intimidating a woman makes him strong." The tone was cold, controlled, but each sentence cut deeper than any shout. "But you know what you really look like right now?" A dramatic pause. Heavy silence. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Mark swallowed hard, looking away for a moment, and at that instant 2 other guards emerged from between the cars, approaching with steady steps. "Sir, turn around and keep your hands visible," one of them said. Mark hesitated, glancing at Emily, who was now out of the car, still near the door, but with a firmer expression than before. He tried to say something, but the first guard cut him off. "Don't speak to her. You've said enough." While the 2 guards escorted him, the first one turned to Emily and asked if she was okay. She nodded, still trembling, but with a sigh of relief. Mark, now restrained, was led through the parking lot under the disapproving eyes and raised cameras. The guard escorted him to the entrance where the police were already arriving to take over. And at that moment, any trace of control Mark thought he had completely dissolved. The police cruiser pulled up at the east entrance, lights flashing, illuminating Mark's face with alternating blue and red bursts that seemed to highlight the shame etched in every feature. 2 officers stepped out quickly, one already with a notepad in hand, the other maintaining a firm stance watching for any sudden movement. The Walmart guard made a quick gesture toward Mark and spoke clearly. That's him. He was aggressive toward the customer, damaged her vehicle, and caused a disturbance. We have multiple witnesses and recordings. The words fell like verdicts, leaving no room for debate. Mark tried to regain a shred of control. This is an exaggeration. It was just an argument over a spot. The officer holding the notepad looked up, his gaze neutral but with the kind of coldness that silences even the loudest talker. Just an argument? He repeated, gesturing to the surroundings. Because from what I see, there are at least 10 different recordings of this argument. He emphasized the quotation marks with his fingers, and Mark looked away, pressing his lips together. Emily, just a few meters away, watched the scene with her heart racing. She still felt the weight of fear in her hands, but now it was mixed with something else, the sense that justice was unfolding before her eyes. The second officer approached her carefully, asking if she was okay and if she needed medical attention. Emily shook her head, still nearly voiceless, but managed to say thank you. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else, she said, in a tone so firm it even surprised her. The first officer asked Mark to place his hands behind his back. He hesitated, looked around, saw the cell phones recording, and let out a long, almost defeated sigh. This is ridiculous, he muttered, but complied. The handcuffs clicked shut with a sharp snap that echoed through the parking lot, and in that instant, any semblance of control he had vanished. The gathered crowd didn't hide their reactions. Some shook their heads, others whispered, and a few let out an audible, "Serves him right." The Walmart guard stayed near Emily, a silent shield. He didn't say much, but his posture said it all. This woman was no longer alone. Mark was led to the cruiser, and as the officers placed him in the back seat, one leaned down and said something only he could hear. Whatever it was, Mark's expression changed. The arrogance disappeared, replaced by pure defeat. When the cruiser door closed, the silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer the tense silence of fear, but the quiet of closure. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the air finally enter her lungs without the suffocating weight. The guard turned to her and said, "You did the right thing." Emily looked at him, confused. "But I didn't do anything." He gave a slight smile. "Exactly. You didn't fight back, and that kept him from having any excuse for what he did." The cruiser pulled away slowly, leaving behind the shimmer of lights reflected on the parked cars. Emily stood still for a few seconds, watching, until she realized several people were still looking at her, some smiling encouragingly, others simply nodding. She returned the gesture with a timid wave and got into her car. Before closing the door, she looked at the guard and said, "Thank you." "Really?" He answered only with a firm nod. On the drive home, the entire scene replayed in her mind, but now with a different weight. It wasn't just fear echoing there anymore, but the certainty that sometimes people really do step up. The next day, the video of the confrontation was already circulating on social media, with thousands of comments and shares. Many praised the guard's courage and the police's response. Others, outraged, said that what happened to Mark wasn't nearly enough for what he did. Emily read a few messages and, for the first time since it all happened, smiled to herself. And somewhere far away, Mark discovered that the video was trending, with his face plastered across the screen and the headline, "Man attacks woman over parking spot and is arrested in front of everyone." The shame he had tried to inflict in that parking lot had come back to him tenfold. And this time, there was no audience to cheer him on, only an entire city that knew exactly who he was and what he had done. Emily stood still for a few seconds after the patrol car left the parking lot, as if the sound of its wheels on the asphalt was still vibrating inside her. Her heart was beating too fast for her to think clearly, and the feeling was strange, part relief, part emptiness. The people who had gathered to watch began to disperse, but not before glancing at her. Some looks were sympathetic, others purely curious, and there were also those longer, almost inquisitive stares, as if trying to figure out who this woman was who, for a moment, had become the involuntary center of all that chaos. She took a deep breath, ran her hand through her tied hair, feeling the day's heat mixed with the cold sweat on her neck. The guard was still a few meters away, talking on the radio, but his posture remained upright, firm, as if something could happen again at any moment. Emily looked at the Corolla and noticed the marks. The slightly misaligned side mirror, the dust smudged by Mark's sweaty hand, some light scratches on the glass. No serious damage, but each mark carried the weight of what she had just been through. She ran her finger over the hot metal and felt a pang in her chest. Not for the car, but for herself, for the invasion, for the way she had been reduced to a target of shouts and threats in front of strangers. She tried to tell herself it was fine, that it was over, but something in the tension of her body said the story wasn't truly closed. The guard finished his radio call and approached her. "The police will file a report. They'll get in touch so you can give a statement," he said, his tone softer than before but still carrying the authority of someone in charge. Emily nodded, unable to say much. "Do you live far from here?" he asked, maybe considering whether he should escort her home. "No, about 15 minutes," she replied quietly. He gave a nod, and for a moment they stood in silence, just watching the parking lot slowly return to normal. Emily spent the rest of the day trying to get back to her routine, but the memory of the scene in the parking lot came back in waves. Every detail, the sharp sound of Mark's hand against the glass, the guard's firmness, the people's stares, appeared before her as if it had happened just minutes earlier. That night she could hardly sleep. When she closed her eyes, it wasn't just Mark's anger she relived, but also the strange feeling of having been, for a few moments, both seen and defended by so many strangers. There was something in that she couldn't explain, a mix of vulnerability and strength that seemed to grow inside her silently. The next morning, as she was having coffee, her phone began buzzing nonstop. Messages, notifications, links from friends and even distant acquaintances. The video was everywhere. Neighborhood groups, local news pages, even large Instagram accounts. Emily hesitated before watching, but when she pressed play, she saw herself sitting in the car, eyes fixed on the steering wheel, and the guard placing himself between her and Mark. A lump formed in her throat. The image of herself at that moment didn't show just fear. It also showed something she hadn't noticed before: resistance. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't fought back, but she also hadn't given in. Throughout the day, she read hundreds of comments. Many spoke about the guard, praising his courage. Others remarked on how dignified her posture had been, even in the face of such humiliation. Some said the scene reminded them of situations they had gone through, and how so often no one had intervened. Emily realized the story was touching people she would never meet. In the afternoon, while hanging clothes out to dry on the small balcony of her apartment, she heard a female voice calling her name. It was her upstairs neighbor, a white-haired lady named Martha, holding a folded newspaper. "I saw you here," she said, showing the page. There was an article about the case with a photo taken from one of the videos. "I just wanted to tell you, what you went through was horrible, but you were very brave." Emily thanked her, feeling her eyes well up. She wasn't used to receiving that kind of recognition, and something in Martha's sincere tone disarmed her. At nightfall, Emily was sitting on the couch when she received a message from an unknown number. It wasn't threatening or invasive. It simply read, "I was there. I saw everything. Thank you for reminding me that there are still people worth defending." Emily read and reread those words, trying to imagine who might have sent them. Maybe someone among the onlookers. Maybe someone just passing by who had decided to stop. It didn't matter. The impact of that sentence hit deep, because until that moment, she hadn't thought her experience could mean something to someone else. She suddenly felt the urge to go out and take a walk. She needed to breathe a different air. When she went down, she saw that on a bench in the square in front of her building, there was a small white envelope. It had no name, just a simple hand-drawn parking space in pen. She looked around for someone who might have left it, but the square was empty. She sat on the bench and opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet, with just a few words written by hand. "What you did was more than defend yourself. You gave strength to those who didn't have the courage." Emily sat there, reading and rereading, feeling the night's chill settle in. Something inside her shifted. It was no longer fear, but a new awareness that somehow what she had lived through in that parking lot had gone beyond the boundaries of her own story And at that moment, she realized life was about to show her something she never could have imagined. Emily sat on the park bench for a few more minutes, holding the envelope carefully as if it were a fragile object. The handwriting was firm, slanting to the right, and each word seemed deliberately chosen. She slipped the note into her coat pocket and looked out at the nearly deserted street, trying to guess who might have left it there. For a moment, she thought of the Walmart guard, but quickly dismissed the idea. He couldn't possibly know where she lived. The next day, her routine started early. Emily went to the corner bakery to buy coffee and bread. When she walked in, she noticed a friendly-looking young man behind the counter whom she had never seen before. He gave her a brief smile, as if he recognized her but said nothing. Emily ordered her coffee and, while waiting, noticed that on the shop's bulletin board there was a printout of the parking lot video, with the caption, "Don't turn a blind eye to what's wrong." The photo captured the exact moment the guard stood between her and Mark. Intrigued, Emily asked the clerk who had put it there. The young woman pointed to the man behind the counter. It was him. He came in early today and asked to put it up. The man, realizing they were talking about him, came over. "Sorry if this seems strange, but I was there that day," he said. Emily looked at him, trying to remember if she had seen his face among the crowd. "I was in my car 2 rows behind yours when it all started," he continued. "And I didn't do anything. I just stood there watching. I felt ashamed afterward." He looked down, fiddling with his apron. "When I saw the video going around, I realized your calm showed me I didn't have to be afraid to step in. Maybe I didn't help you, but I can help someone else someday." He smiled shyly and went back behind the counter. Emily left the bakery with her coffee in hand and a tightness in her chest that wasn't sadness, but something closer to gratitude. The message in the envelope, the poster at the bakery, the young man's words. They all seemed to point to the same thing. What had happened hadn't stayed in that parking lot. It had echoed outward. That night, before going to sleep, she decided to write a short post and share it online along with a photo of the empty square. She briefly told the story of the note and the encounter at the bakery. She ended with, "Sometimes it's not about winning an argument or proving you're right. It's about staying whole even when someone tries to break you. And if that inspires someone to act, it's already worth it." The post was shared far more than she expected. Among the hundreds of comments, one stood out. There was no profile picture, just the name, Martha J., her white-haired neighbor. The comment read, "Many years ago, I went through something similar. I wish I had had the strength I saw in you. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to reclaim a piece of who we are." Emily put her phone down and for the first time since that day slept deeply, not because the memory had faded, but because she finally understood that in some way, what she had lived through wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who has ever needed someone to show them it's possible to resist, even in silence, and that sometimes that silence speaks louder than any shout. Have you ever been in a situation where someone stepped in for you, or you stepped in for someone else? Share your story in the comments. It might inspire many people to act when it matters most. If this story touched you in some way, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That way more people will discover stories that prove small acts of courage can change lives.